Welcome to the NewsHour. Today in Washington, President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte announced they would give Ukraine new American weapons bought by European allies. And President Trump threatened massive new sanctions on Russia if there is no ceasefire established by early September. As Nick Schifrin reports, it was a remarkable turnaround for a president who only months ago blamed Ukraine for the war and ridiculed its president.
As eastern Ukraine burned after another Russian attack, President Trump embraced Ukraine's and Europe's defense.
We are going to be sending them weapons and they're going to be paying for them.
Ukraine has relied on tens of billions of dollars of American weapons, but until today, the Trump administration had not authorized any new shipments. Now, Europe will send its own U.S.-made weapons to Ukraine, including Patriot air defense, and then buy new U.S. weapons to backfill their own stocks. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte.
It will mean that Ukraine can get its hands on really massive numbers of military equipment, both for air defense, but also missiles, ammunition, etc., etc.
And the president who earlier this year publicly embarrassed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying.
Today said his break with Putin was a family affair.
We thought we had a deal numerous times. I'd get home, I'd say, First Lady, I had the most wonderful talk with Vladimir. I think we're finished. And then I'll turn on the television, or she'll say to me one time, wow, that's strange because they just bombed a nursing home. I said, what?
Tonight, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky praised Trump's shift.
I am grateful to President Trump for his willingness to support the protection of our people's lives.
The UN says that last month, more Ukrainian civilians died than in any month over the last 3 years. And Russia fired 10 times the number of drones than it did 1 year ago.
Doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs.
Russia sells $3 billion worth of goods to the United States, so tariffs would have relatively little impact. But a Senate bill would authorize President Trump to impose massive secondary sanctions on the countries buying Russian oil, including India and China. That could help cripple Russia's economy, bill co-sponsor Senator Lindsey Graham said yesterday on Face the Nation.
We're going after the people who keep Putin in business, and additional sanctions on Russia itself. This is truly a sledgehammer available to President Trump to end this war.
And for perspective on the Trump administration's decision to arm Ukraine, we turn to Kurt Volker. He was U.S. ambassador to NATO during the George W. Bush administration and special representative for Ukraine negotiations during the first Trump administration. Ambassador Volker, thanks very much. Welcome back to the NewsHour. Bottom line, how significant is this deal that President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte announced today, in which Europe will provide Ukraine arms from their stockpiles and then pay the United States to backfill those same weapons?
Well, I think it's very significant because it removes an uncertainty that had been plaguing Ukraine and plaguing Europe ever since the beginning of the Trump administration. No one was really sure if the Trump administration was going to allow American arms and ammunition to continue to flow to Ukraine. And now this takes away that doubt. It is not taxpayer funded by American taxpayers, which is something that Trump has always said that he would not do. It is instead funded on a paid-for basis. European allies are going to be buying the American weapons and ammunition and providing them to Ukraine, and Trump is quite comfortable with that. So I think this is very significant in terms of the psychology of where this is now in the military effort.
Russia is pounding Ukraine every night with what seems like daily records of drones and missiles. And Russia has taken over a little bit of Ukrainian territory in the last couple months in eastern and northeastern Ukraine, even at great cost in terms of number of casualties on the Russian side. But given that, what impact on the battlefield can these weapons actually have?
Well, there's a couple impacts. First off, more Patriots and more air defense weapons are going to protect Ukrainian civilians, make these Russian nightly attacks less effective. Second, with longer range weapons that can go deeper into Russia, they can take out some of the airfields, some of the military facilities, some of the drone factories perhaps, that are empowering Russia in this way. And third, with artillery shells, they can hold the line better on the front line than they've been able to do in the past few months. Mostly what Ukraine has done is use its own homemade drones to prevent substantial Russian advances and inflict heavy losses. Artillery is going to strengthen the Ukrainian defensive position.
Let's talk about President Trump's words about President Putin today. You, of course, started as special representative for the first President Trump administration in 2017 and 2018. President Trump famously sided with President Putin over the intelligence community when it comes to 2016 election meddling. Even more recently, President Trump has said things like, well, Zelensky started the war, Ukraine started the war. But today, President Trump is now saying that Putin feeds him, quote, BS. What do you say about the evolution that President Trump has had over President Putin?
I think he was tactically trying to say nice things about Putin in order to be part of an effort of encouraging Putin to come to the table, have a ceasefire, and we could lift sanctions, we could start doing business again with Russia. That's where Trump wanted to go. So he was saying nice things that way. I think he's become convinced that Putin is just blowing him off. He is dragging out the idea of negotiations while meanwhile ramping up his attacks and killing civilians. So I think he has changed his rhetoric now, coming to the conclusion that that's the only way he's actually going to put some pressure on Putin.
But why not achieve that clarity, if you will, years ago? People like you, other people were telling President Trump that, hey, Putin's not a friend. Putin is no ally of the United States. Why now, do you think, has President Trump come to this conclusion?
I suppose because he has experienced it personally now. Every president, not just President Trump, every president has believed that they could do a reset, to quote an Obama phrase, with Putin. And everyone believed that they could somehow be the special ingredient to get Putin to behave. I think Trump has now given his best effort at the same thing, realized that Putin is not changing, he's not going to come to terms, he's not going to do a ceasefire, and so he has now decided that it's time to ramp up the pressure.
And finally, Ambassador Volker, in the short time I have left, President Trump today threatened sanctions on Russia if there is no ceasefire in the next 50 days. Those come from a bill in Congress right now that's co-sponsored by Senators Graham and Blumenthal. You heard Senator Graham earlier in the story that we had say that if these sanctions are imposed, that can end the war. Do you believe that's true? What's the impact of those sanctions?
I think it contributes to the end of the war. What this would do is dry up the financial resources that continue to flow into the Kremlin's coffers, which they use to pay for the war effort. And so cutting off that supply of funds, of payments for oil and gas is critical. And the secondary sanctions should be enough to dissuade other countries and other actors from being willing to participate in that sanctions busting effort.
Ambassador Kurt Volker, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick.